Alright guys, thought today I would do a little bit of tutorial stuff so you can work at your own pace because we're going to be doing quite a few different things to get you ready for your assignment next week. So the first thing is you're going to get the file that is called white balance. And I'm going to teach you a little bit about the curves and the levels tools and just stuff that you can do to improve photos when they look like this. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to go up here under image and we're going to do adjustments, and we're going to be using either levels or curves. Now curves is a little bit more pro, so let's go ahead and do that. Alright, so here's what we see here. This little histogram chart right here shows the level of blacks and whites that are in our image, and you'll notice that it's pretty heavy on the darker side, and then it kind of peters off and there's not very much going on the lighter side. Now, if this was a mountain, what you always want to do is at the very bottom of this mountain, here and on this side, which is already at the bottom of the mountain, you want to make sure that these things are brought to the bottom of the mountain. You don't want to go too far this way, or what's going to happen is everything that's close to white is going to just be washed out and become white. If you're too far this way, though, you won't have anything that's purely white, and so this is just a good way of getting good contrast in your image. Now, in this particular case, this is called RGB, which means it's getting all the different colors. But we also notice there's some color issues. So we're going to go into our red, and we're going to do the same thing. I'm going to go up to the mountain on this side and on that side, and then I'm going to go over here to green, and I'm going to try pulling it down just a little bit. Let's try that. And the same thing on blue. And on blue, you'll notice it's way too low, and you'll see that this color is already starting to come out. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to go back, and I'm going to go back to my RGB, and I'm going to say, do I want to make it lighter or darker? And to do this, I'm going to go in the middle. So because I noticed it was pretty much on the dark side, I'm just going to kind of eye it until it looks a little bit better. That's fine. Let's try going into my red now and pulling those down a bit because he was a little bit red. Let's go into green and pull him down just a tiny touch. You don't want to go too low, and then play around with your blue. Now I got to be careful here. I don't want to overdo it. So let's actually pull this down. That's pretty low. I think that's a little bit too much on there. Just kind of play around with it until, yeah, and sometimes I'll even go through again and just say, is that really what I wanted? Do I still have a little too much of one or the other? And it just takes some practice to kind of get used to this process, but you just go through them, and let's say that's pretty close. So maybe that's not perfect, but let's look at the before and after. I go into my history now. This is what we started off with. And it's way better. You can't deny it. This is a pretty awful image. And at least now we're getting something close to, something professional that we could use. So let's close this one. Now, before you close this, just pull me over, the real Mr. Ginelli, and let me know what you're doing so I can see how it looks. I'd like to keep track of this. But you don't need to save. This is just practice. Let's move on to the next one. And that is, we'll use overexposure for the next one. Okay, so we're going to go through the same process of going into our colors curves. And actually for this one, I'll go ahead and show you, I'm thinking of a different program. For this one, you go to image adjustments, and let's do levels this time so you can see the difference. Basically the same thing, except for instead of moving that thing in the middle, you have to move these little dots. Now on the mountain, we could probably pull this one over to here to be safe. And this is the blacks. Now you'll notice if I keep going this direction, everything that's even close to black will just become black, and that's called crushing. We don't want to do that. We don't want to crush our black. So I'm going to go right up to the beginning of that mountain right there. Obviously there's tons of white. I don't have to worry about pulling that down. That'll just wash it out more. You could potentially pull your output down a little bit. if the image is a raw image, it'll actually have information that goes beyond this line, but since this is not a raw image, it won't, so that would not be useful. But what we definitely want to work with is this guy in the middle, and we want to pull it to the darker side. And just kind of play around with that. Let me see if that's going to help at all. I could, nah, I'm going to leave that alone. Maybe even go a little bit less here because I'm seeing that some of it's kind of washing out. And something like that. Let's take a look at this and see how it looks. This is before, this is the after. Definitely better. There's no doubt. So again, show me this before you move on to the next one. And that was just using the levels tool. So let's try the same thing with this guy. Underexposed, so it's the opposite problem. So the background's perfectly exposed. He's not. So there's two ways we can handle this. First, let's just go ahead and go into our... Actually, what I'm going to do is I'm going to duplicate this layer by just dragging it here. I want a copy of it so I can go back later and play around with it some more. But for now, I'm just going to go ahead and go into my colors. Oops. Sorry. I'm thinking of GIMP still. Image adjustments, curves. And it looks like we actually already are at the peaks of our mountains. There's not any spaces on the side. So I'm just going to pull this one over a little bit. And the reason why is because it's looking at all of this stuff. Now, if we ignore the background and we just kind of eye it, well, we don't want to play with that one. We could potentially be okay washing out our background and just do this until the foreground looks pretty much properly exposed, and then you can just play around with the middle until you get about there. Now there's not really any color issues on this one, so I probably don't have to go into here and play around with those. I could if you wanted to. You'll notice in this one, because we did that, everything looks kind of bumpy. Those artifacts are called grain, and you get those when you have an underexposed image. If you shoot at night, you're going to get grain. So that's just the nature of photography. There's not really much you can do about it, which is why we want to use a lot of light. What this scene could have used is for them to have closed these windows and increase the exposure, or for them to have put some light or reflectors into this room. Now you'll notice the foreground looks good, but the background looks bad. So there are ways that you can overcome this issue, and I'm just turning the eyeball off on this one, so I'm just gonna put it down to the bottom here for now, or out of the way. And on this top one trick that I've seen is you duplicate your layer, and then you go to you try some of these different modes like lighten only. No, that didn't work. Let's try another one, overlay. No, that just does the opposite of what we want. So screen, that's not bad. Although we're still getting the washed out background. Probably the only way to really deal with this issue is to use your selection tool. And I would take my select tool. And you guys haven't seen these before, but there's the magnetic lasso tool, and the lasso tool. Lasso tool allows you to just create your own selection by clicking and dragging. And there you go. So if we use the magnetic lasso tool, it basically does the same thing, except for it tries to stick to the edges. You got to be a little more careful than why I was, though. Let's try that again. So I'm going to use the magnetic lasso tool, and I'm just going to kind of go along these edges and come in there. It didn't get it. Yeah, that's kind of a pain. I'm not doing much better than I would if I would just use the other lasso tool, but let's just continue. And go down here, up, down, 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 down. All right, so that didn't turn out too well, but now what we can do is we can go into our mask mode, and we can just take, if you use a black paintbrush, it will make your mask bigger. If you use a white one, it'll decrease it. So let me just get this full opacity right here, and I'm just going to go in, zoom in here, and wherever I want to get rid of the mask, I'll use white, and wherever I want to include it, I'll use black. So I'm I'm not going to take the time to do this right now because you probably don't want to sit here and watch me, but I think you get it. Again, just white and black. Even though it looks red, that's just to show you where it is. And I'm using spacebar and click to move around, just like we did in Illustrator. Except for this keyboard stinks because it's wireless and it doesn't always register my movements. But anyway, let's say that you just took the time to finish this. You can pause this now and work on this. So I'll assume you're done. Let me go back into my other mode here. And now we have, this is kind of its own thing. So what we can do is we can duplicate this layer. And I'll just do a select invert. Well, actually, let's do this. Turn these off so you can see what I'm doing here. I'm going to hit delete. Make a little window there. Select. Actually, you know what? I shouldn't do delete. I should do a mask. Right? So we'll put that mask there. Let me turn this layer on now. Now we'll go into our image adjustments curves. You can make all those changes like we already did before, and this is what you'll get. So what you're doing is you're combining the best of both images. So if we look at our original, which is when we had this, you'll notice this doesn't change. Only the foreground does. And so now you've taken two images essentially and combined them and gotten something that's even better than you could before. So there you go. When you're done with this, please show me. I'd like to see how you did with it. Okay. What else can you do with Photoshop? Well, yesterday we took the time to cut out those little pieces of a sandwich. What's easy about that though is it was on a white background. Most of the time you're not gonna have that luxury. So let's go ahead and do this. Go online, and I want you to go to Google and just do a search for any sort of background. We're going to take this guy Bear Grylls and we're going to put him in some sort of background. So wherever you want to see Bear Grylls, let's say it is, I'll just put him in the desert. Go to images, and I want you to go to search tools, and I want you to change the size to larger than 1024 by 768. Anytime you're working in Photoshop, you want pretty good high quality images. You might even go 2 megapixels to keep your image quality really, really high. If you don't do that, you're going to get pixelization, and since these are not vector graphics, they don't scale, you're going to want to make sure you do this. I'm going to pause the video because it's break, and you can finish this next one when you're done with the first one. See ya.